Okay, so I drew out what I wanted to make, but it looked like a weird half amoeba. So here are some pictures from the Vampire's Wife website. I saw this kaftan and I thought it was just so pretty. Like it's shiny and ruffly and flowy and looks really comfy. And then I saw the price, 1,795 big ones. I can't afford that, so I figured I'd try making it because the construction doesn't look that bad. So here we go. Okay, so one of the big trade-offs that has to be made is fiber content because the original garment is wool, silk, and polyester, and the lining is 100% silk. But the fabric that I found at Joann's is a polyester with some kind of stretch in it. I think I'm going to start with this and then see how see-through it is and then figure out if I want to line it. Then I'll have to find something that I have ready to use. But I thought this was so pretty, you know? I love the pastel metallic rainbow situation. All right, here's another beautiful drawing from me. I did a quick measurement of shoulder to elbow was about 12 inches. And then across my shoulders was about 15. So 12, 12, and 15 give me about 39 inches. Okay, so I did a quick measurement. It's about 58-ish inches, and then half an inch on this side is white, and half an inch on this side is like selvagey. I think I might not hem the ruffles or anything because it stretches on the this way. This way it stretches widthwise but not really lengthwise, so but I think the edge isn't fraying at all, so I kind of like the idea of having it just be light and ruffly. All right, I'm just letting it hang down to see what that length is, so I'll look at this footage because I don't have my glasses on. Okay, so I drew out what I'm going to cut here. Here's the length and the width. And this back one isn't proportional, but the neckline's going to come down 1 inch. And then this includes seam allowances for the length. And then I was doing all this math, and then I realized that I have to cut it like this and not like this because the stripes have to be going the same way. And the fall should be similar, you know? So I did all this and then I just crossed it out. I was like, I have to get width. So 57, how many strips would I need to get that much length? So I would need about 8.5 strips of 8.5 inch ruffle pieces. How much is that? Let me do that math real fast. So if I have 8.5 lengths I need, and each one is 8.5 inches wide, that ends up being about 72.25 inches, and that ends up being about 2 yards exactly. Okay, just did the quick math on here too. So this ends up being about 2.27 yards needed, assuming that you're not piecing. And so, I don't know, being on the safe side, I guess you could get away with 4 yards, probably 4.5 yards for what I'm going to try to do. So I should have a bit left over. 4.5 yards. Oops. Total. Also, by the way, I am 5'8", so if you're significantly shorter, you can make this part shorter and the ruffle shorter too if you want the same proportions. So you'll need less, but if you're taller than me, you'll need more, and if you're broader than me, you'll need more too. I just use my shoulders, but if you know, depending on your body type, you might need to make it longer or like wider or narrower, or you know, whatever you need. So I measured down the 41 inches and just clipped it there. So now I'm gonna fold it in half I think, or maybe, yeah, I'll fold it in half and then see how far in I need to cut, I think. I think that's the next step. Alright, I went to 42 just in case I have to even things out, and then I measured over from the past the white part because I think I'm gonna try to cut that off. And oh, this does not look straight here, does it? Let me judge that. Okay, I think that looks a little better. I mean, it's gonna stretch out a bit. This is the best way I could think to do it. So I'm just gonna follow that 40-inch. I'm gonna see if I can follow like the line to help me be straight, and then cut it this way. So last time I worked with a stretchy fabric, I swore never to do it again because it was such a pain to work with. But here we are. I found another fabric that I wanted to work with, and it is stretchy. So I bought a cutting mat and a rotary cutter, hoping it would make my life easier. And it did. It really helped cut the ruffles. But it didn't help here, mostly because there was a learning curve for me. And I think had I used a ruler to stabilize the fabric and push down to have a straight edge to cut against, it would have worked just fine. So definitely would recommend a cutting mat and a rotary cutter for these stretchy things from hell. Though this one wasn't as bad as the last one I worked with, probably because it only had a one-way stretch and the fabric just wasn't as flimsy. So I was definitely thankful for that. After cutting off the selvage, I then laid the fabric back down, folded in half again to cut out the neckline. And everything was going fine. I slipped it to the center and measured out that 4 inches on either side and measured down that 1 inch for the back and then cut it out so that I would have the back done, and then I'd cut deeper for the front neckline. However, that's where I messed up. So I measured down 4 inches. I did make it higher than I was going to before. But then instead of only cutting one layer, I accidentally cut both. So that was done. And then I was like, okay, well, maybe I can separate them now and just cut the front and leave the back so I can do it higher. So that's what I did on that side. And then I flipped that cut piece over so that I could use it as a template. And then I proceeded to forget to separate the layers again and just cut through both. So at that point I was like, all right, the front and back are gonna have the same depth, and that is what it is. And then after cleaning it up, I made sure it was even, matching up the front and the back and the sides. While I was thinking about the neckline, I decided to make the facing. So I traced the neck hole onto some paper and added a couple inches all the way around and used that pattern piece to cut out the fabric from the offcut. But I ended up not using this because I lined the fabric fully. Before moving on to the ruffles, I folded the main body lengthwise again and then folded it again widthwise. So it was in quarters, lining up the neckline so that I could then work on trimming the bottom where I'd added on an extra inch to make sure I could even it out. I also added in the curve that I thought it probably had, judging from the pictures, though I think maybe I should have made the curve more intense or had it be broader and shallower, but it looked fine like this too. I moved on to cutting the ruffles, and at first I was doing them one at a time, but that did not last long. Okay, hope I don't regret this, but I've given up doing one layer at a time because I've literally done two. It's taken me forever. So hopefully I can knock out the next seven. Oh God, seven quickly because I'm folding them into quarters so that I can just get through it. All right, this is the last ruffle. Hopefully, I'm cutting. I guess if it ends up being short, then I'll have to cut more. But the selvage has changed. I've been cutting off selvages as I go, and it went from like nothing to like a half an inch. Here, it went from like this big to this. So that's not great. So I think I was using it to like center myself and stuff too, and clearly I shouldn't have. Well, doesn't matter. It's fine. So it's gonna be ruffled anyway, so probably won't be noticeable. Hopefully. But yeah, that's really annoying. I can see why this was on clearance. Or maybe just because they're trying to get into fall fabric. Anyway, I'll just cut off this like 2 inches. How much is this? It's like more than 1.5 inches. That's ridiculous. Alright, anyway. I'll keep going. It's a couple days later. Okay, so I'm just thinking like this is the fabric. So you can fully see the mat underneath it. And I was thinking of just something underneath it, but now I'm wondering if maybe a lining is a good option. And I do have this flowy, still sheer, like chiffon, I think. And I think maybe this might be the best bet because it's still light and flowy. So hopefully it won't do too much bad, I guess. Won't make it too heavy. But it's see-through on its own, but when I put this on top, I feel them together is pretty opaque. So I'm thinking of just cutting out just like the body in this also. And then I won't have to use the facing. I'll just use this and basically bagline it, I guess. So let's try that. Okay. So I've layered them both on the floor and I put the mat in the middle. Just peeking through to like get the I just realized something. Oh no. Alright, I'm gonna have to redo this because it has to be on the other side. I could cut it like this, but no. Okay, I'm going to flip this, but then pin it, I think, and then take care of like maybe hand sew around here, or baste it at least, or pin it really well. We'll see. I'm not gonna flip it. I don't want to mess with the fabric, so I've been pinned 4 points, and now I use a rotary cutter to cut in like this, and I guess I'll use the scissors to cut around. My little tripod's over there, so I'm just gonna do this and then show it. Alright, so I have basted that down. Use my scissors to point here. Basted down the neck, and then so now I'm gonna cut I smoothed it out as best I could. Hopefully it's smooth. And I think I'm going to cut the lining a little bigger than the main fabric because I don't want it to pull when I have to hem it. So okay, I didn't do a perfectly even job, but it is cut a little bigger all the way around. And I also now just realized that this is stretch and the chiffon isn't. So I don't know. I might end up having to just hem it separately and then tack it down strategically so it won't show. I don't know. But it's cut at least. So now I think I'm gonna try to run this through the machine and hopefully that works. I did do a test. I'm trying not to walk on this, but I guess every cut doesn't matter anymore. I can shift now. I did a test and it's a little crinkly. This way. It's a little crinkly when I have the chiffon on the bottom, but when I have the stretch on the bottom, it's not as crinkly. So I think I'm gonna try to sew it this way. Because this is slipperier. This side is more slippery. Alright, time to wind the bobbin because I can't use black thread. Alright, and I'm just going to go through and take out the basting stitches. Okay, it's going to clip in to the curves here. Do this little bit. It's not a point anymore. Okay, I need to get the better lighting here. It's because I just have the ceiling light. Alright, so I clipped around all the curves and now I want to understitch it so the line doesn't show on the right side. But I know it puckers when I have, because I need to move the seam allowance over to the chiffon side and sew it down there, but I know it puckers when this is on the bottom. So I'm going to try to sew it this way and just keep everything over that side. You know what? I should just iron it. Should I? Am I going to do that effort right now? Or can I just push it to the side? I'm just going to push it to the side probably. Maybe. Okay, I was going to just understitch it, but it's kind of hard to do it without it wanting to be on the correct side. So I've given in and am ironing it down to make it easier. So the neckline's understitched and is looking good. It's a little wider than I had wanted. I think it just touched out or something happened before I could get it done, or I made it too big. It's also possible. So this is lying pretty well now, I think. And then so next up, I think, is going to be just going through the lining here. And to make my life easier, I think what I'm going to do is just turn it in towards the inside. So where I'm going to end up sewing it and just machine stitch it all the way around. So then when I'm hand sewing it, which I'm probably going to hand sew it, I think, I won't have to turn it in. But I will do a quick tester to make sure I can do that. Okay, it seemed to sew fine, so I'm just going to go for it. I also want to do this after I get the ruffles on, because it's going to be even more to fit through here, and I don't have like the biggest machine. So time to I'm not going to roll it twice, just because it's going to be on the inside once I sew it down, hopefully anyway. Okay, I did not set this up in time, but here we go. I wasn't going to roll hem it, but now I think I am, so I'm just folding it twice and then sewing it because it's already fraying quite a bit. So I'm just gonna do this real fast, and I think it's fine. Okay, it's the next day. I just left it like this in the sewing machine because it's so long. And my curves, the curves I cut in, I don't know if it's visible. That I mean, they're a little questionable in terms of quality, but I don't care. It's fine. So I'm just gonna keep going and try to get this done before eating. All right. The end is near. Oh my goodness. This is why I didn't want to do the lining because like this stuff doesn't fray as far as I can see. So like the lining made me do exactly what I didn't want to do. But it's almost at the end and then I can move on to something else. So yay. Okay, I'm done. I also went through the curves and just did a quick zigzag because they just were not. I did not think they would stop the fraying if I have to leave it loose or something. I don't know. All right, now I think I have to seam together the ruffles. All right, now I'm gonna have to sew together all the ends of the ruffles. So I don't even think I have to pin it really. It's just a straight edge. So yeah, take it to the sewing machine and run it through. All right, I have a giant snake now. It's not perfect at every seam in terms of the. Can I even find a seam now? In terms of like it doesn't match up perfectly at every seam in terms of length, but I think it'll be fine. It'll be ruffled up, so it should be okay. And I think next up, I did a test of trying to ruffle it like I usually do. Usually I just crank up the tension on my machine and then increase the stitch length here. Oh, wow, the track's getting stuck. Increase the stitch length here to 10 and then crank this up all the way to the max. I think it's 9. And run it through, and that usually just ruffles it automatically, and then I can just zhuzh it later. But that doesn't work on this. I did a test, I don't know where that went. Probably because it's stretchy fabric. So I'm just gonna do what I've seen Angela Clayton do. She just shoves it through. So I'm just gonna crinkle it as I go and shove it through, and hopefully that will work. I did give the ruffle seams a quick press before gathering so that it would just look nicer. Okay, so there's not quite enough. So I'm just gonna try to overshoot a bit. So if this was 3/4, how much I needed 1/4 more. Then I'm just gonna do 2 more. I have some more lengths I can cut. So then I'm gonna cut 2 more and hopefully that'll be enough to cover this section. And I'm also considering sewing it down like this instead of having it right sides facing and coming out. Because that'll look like this, which is how the original one is, I think. But I think I like the little ruffle out. I think it adds a little something. So, but that's after I finish cutting out some more and ruffling some more. Also, I'm not scrunching as I'm going. I'm just feeding it through and realizing that it's scrunching just fine. So I didn't have to try to do all that weirdness I was doing before. Probably when I did the tester, I did it the other direction, and it only stretches. Anyway, it must not stretch as much in this direction as it does in this direction, or vice versa. I think whatever it is, I can just go straight through. So that would have been good to know earlier. Also, this is not going to be perfect. I already see like I cut things wrong somewhere, but hopefully the ruffling of it will fix it or make it look not as noticeable. So close. All right, I'm gonna do one more strip and then hopefully that's good. All right, about right. So hopefully when I sew it on, it stays that way. Okay, so here I was figuring out what the best way would be to sew the ruffle on the way I wanted to, and I settled on sewing the actual ruffle part 3/4 down from its edge, and I wanted another ½ inch of fabric below that left behind it. Does that make sense? So that means 3/4 plus ½ inch would end up being 1.25 inches. So I got that math down right after I already sewed a guide stitch of 1/2 inch. So then I redid it at 1.25 inches, putting a piece of tape on the sewing machine so that I had a guide to do that. And after I had that, I cut out a piece of paper that was 3/4 inch wide so that I could use that as a guide to figure out how far away from the edge of the ruffle to sew. So I lined the ruffle up with the 1.25 inch sewing line, and then I used the paper to line up the needle so that the needle was 3/4 inch from that guideline. Sounds really confusing, but I don't know how else to explain that. And yeah, because I wanted to have enough room at the top of the ruffle so that it would have that same effect that I liked and why I wanted the ruffle on the top in the first place instead of seamed together, right sides together. So yeah, I hope that makes some kind of sense. I have no idea if it did. I realized after I finished sewing the ruffle on that my first guess was right, and I really did only need 2 more lengths of ruffle. So I had an extra length that I'm going to have to use for something else now. And for where the 2 ends of the ruffle met, I just put them right sides together and sewed them real quick with the machine. And it wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be because it's in the ruffle and it blends in pretty well. I also ended up leaving the gathering stitches because I was afraid if I took them out, it would make the top part of the ruffle floppy, and that isn't what I wanted to happen. So I left them in and added bonus of it being a lot easier to leave those threads in. I tried it on and then figured out how much space I wanted for my arm and how far down I wanted to sew before I let the side seam open again. So for me, that ended up being about 10 inches down from the shoulder. The shoulder is, I just lined up the neckline so it was even and figured that was where the shoulder was. So 10 inches down from that for the armhole, and then 16.25 inches down from there is how far I sewed down the side seams. So then I was going to do that and then realized that maybe I should make sure the neckline looks right, and it did look like it was rolling a bit, maybe even with the understitching. So I decided to top stitch that real fast following the edge of the presser foot. So with that taken care of, I then also realized that before I sewed the side seam shut, I should probably see how I wanted to tack down the lining. And that's when I realized that was going to be a little tricky because it was just a lot of fabric and it wasn't perfectly even all the way around. And the fact that the outside was stretchy and the inside wasn't, I don't know, I just decided to leave it free. So the only place the lining and the outside fabric is connected in the end is at the neckline. And I think that was the right decision because it didn't show. I checked that before I decided to tack it. It didn't show and it didn't pull on the outside fabric, which I think was the right decision. With all that taken care of, I finally moved on to sewing the side seams. So that extra half an inch that I left on the main body when I sewed the ruffle on is what I ended up using to sew the side seams together. That wasn't my original intention, but that's what ended up happening when I realized how much ruffleage there was that was flopping about, and how I didn't want the seam to show. So it just felt like the easiest thing to do was to hand sew that seam allowance of the front and back together. So I did that, and I tried it on real fast to make sure it looked okay, and it did. So then I moved on to machine sewing that section again, just to reinforce it. It wasn't perfect because it was kind of hard to get it under the foot with that thickness of the two ruffles and the front and the back. But I managed to do it enough to feel secure, I guess. Okay, now I'm at this position in the original design, there's like a little indent here and a little, one of those wee tiny little bows made of the same fabric. I didn't really like that, so I didn't do it. Also, the lack of loop did make it easier also. So I have some options. I could do, you can't really tell here, but maybe if I go like this. Yeah, there we go. This is like a rainbow metallic rickrack that I just happened to have from like a secondhand stash I bought off of somebody. So that's an option if I wanted to just go around. I also have from a Mother's Day gift at some point, like to the moms. So mother-in-law gave it back to me, and you know, I saw in the new Rodarte collection they have like flowers, like kind of flower brooch-like things. So I'm wondering if I can get this off. Maybe, okay. Maybe this isn't a bad idea. Maybe I could do something like a flower, like, you know, that's a vibe, like just flower, you know. It could also be with leaves. I don't know. I'm gonna play around and see how I'm feeling. Okay, I've been playing around with it, so I'm thinking maybe this is good. So the flower, and then this kind of sheer lace I have in my stash, just to like that length, I think, hanging down. And then I'm gonna try my best to maybe sew it onto this bobby pin so I can remove it. I don't know if I want to use a safety pin because I don't want to put holes in it, but let me see if I can do that. I ended up just sewing the folded lace to the back of the flower, and then using really big stitches to just tack the flower in place because it was impossible to try to sew it onto a bobby pin. I don't know what I was thinking. And I figured if I didn't like it, I could either turn the kaftan around and have it in the back under my hair so it'd be hidden mostly, or I could just take it off completely because the stitches I used were really big so that it would be easy to remove. With the flower and the lace attached, it was finished, and I moved on to doing hair and makeup for the reveal. So the finished kaftan was giving me some real Endora from Bewitched vibes, Samantha's mom, and I think even more so than the Vampire's Wife version because it's rainbow and it has the flower and the lace, so it's a little more gaudy, I guess, which I love. So I really leaned into that and did like a thick eyeliner and put on some glitter, and I did my hair in somewhat of a 60s style, or as quickly as I could do a somewhat half up, half down 60s style, because, you know, I'm not that good at hair, so I just did my best. And I put on my silver disco ball heels that are low enough so I can actually wear them and walk around in them. And that was it. So here's my finished Vampire's Wife inspired rainbow ruffled kaftan. I love how this turned out. It's so swishy and flowy and comfortable, and I had such a good time twirling in it. It was so satisfying. Definitely A+ twirlability. It's not perfect in terms of construction. Like the ruffle itself isn't perfect, and the lining inside isn't perfectly hemmed all the way around. And where I sewed the ruffle onto the main body did gather a bit at that seam, so that wasn't perfectly done either. But I just don't really care because I think it looks pretty, and those imperfections are fine. I don't think they're that readily apparent, so I'm super happy with how this turned out. And it's so glamorous. Makes me want to sail about the house. In terms of the original price tag, I did spend like a good amount of time making this. I mean, I'm no expert. I'm just self-taught through YouTube basically. But it did take me some time, and I didn't hem the ruffle. So if I hemmed the ruffle, that would have taken plenty of time because it was so long. And I also didn't end up tacking down the lining inside. I'm assuming the Vampire's Wife version has more couture finishes, so they probably would have tacked the lining down by hand inside, so that's extra time as well, along with the binding, which I'm sure would take longer than me just doing a straight stitch around the neckline. I did do a quick Google search to see how they compensated their workers, and just to get an idea of like where the price would be coming from. I couldn't find a lot. I did see that they sourced their silk apparently from a mill in the UK. So I don't know, like if they compensate their workers fairly and their materials seem to be high quality, I can see how you can end up having a higher price tag. Of course, this polyester situation I got isn't exactly sustainable or the best thing to do either, but it's what I found that seemed to have a similar drape and was so pretty, and I really liked it. So even their version has some polyester in it, so I think there's just some of these like fun fabrics are just gonna have polyester. And the lining I used, I think, was also like a polyester chiffon, if I remember correctly. I bought it because it was cheap on clearance. So that is what it is. There's always like a price to quality or fiber content trade-off. And, you know, that is what it is right now. And, you know, I do what I can and where I can. So, yeah. But overall, I'm super happy with how this turned out, and I would make it again, maybe in a lace or something. That would be fun. Anyway, thanks for watching.